Anyway, hello, good evening. My name is Ben Walker. I am the one of the data journalists at the New Statesman, and the one I'm more proud about is being the co-founder of Britain Elects. Those who don't know what it is, it's a little Twitter account I set up in 2013. It does quite well for itself, and basically that's how I got the job. Okay, that's how I got into the New Statesman, by being quite methodical, being quite incessant in my tweeting. But anyway, I'm going to be talking to you about really the state of UK public opinion, the state of the nation, the state of where we are right now. It's all quite short term when we compare it to the climate crisis, but really you need to win the short term to be able to chart the long term, don't you? You really need to be able to, win these electoral battles, to change government, to change policy. And I'm going to be talking to you about my own obsession with it, fascination, love for it, I suppose, and how I do a bit of it. So I have a little script as well, okay? My expertise, if you want to call it that, is public opinion, elections. I love watching elections. I did my own model for the recent midterms, for those who pay attention to America. It did rather well. It did a little bit better than the Economist, so sorry. It was quite good stuff, and it sort of showed to you that, when fundamental issues that matter most to Americans feel at risk, they will turn out in greater number, and that's what we saw. We saw people who feel most vexed by abortion, feels most vexed by a perception that the Constitution is under threat. They will come out to the ballot box to defend what they perceive to be what is under threat to them, and it's differential turnout, I suppose. But yeah, I joined the New Statesman in 2020, but before that I was sort of just collecting poll data, political opinion polling, opinion polls, every single day. From about 2013. I set up Britain Elects in what was in essence my mum's basement, also known as my bedroom, and I just really have a spreadsheet I've been working on for almost 10 years now, just a collection of opinion polls, standardized, categorized, to be able to sort of chart some of the things that you were able to see before. So one example is, of course, the voting intentions. So you'll be able to get it going back as January 2020 here, but I've been able to get it going back as the 1990s, all really collected, scraped by myself there. But not just the voting intentions, you can also do the economy, you can also do leadership, you can also do what people think, what issues matter most to people. Where do you stand on refugees? Where do you stand on immigration? You're able to standardize it and get it going back as far, even if the company, even if the question is different, has moved around and all that kind of stuff. So, before I go into the UK, I have been a little bit obsessed with more international things, and what polling tells you is it's absolutely key to policy making. Knowing what people think, knowing how people think, why people think the way they think, is actually quite more important than saying, Labour are 20 points ahead. Why are they ahead by 20 points? You need to know that bit to be able to work out how to drill that message home, how to keep it there, and so on and so forth. So there's two data points I want you to just sort of take away here, and it's not UK-based, it's actually international, and one pertains to Afghanistan, and the other to attitudes among Palestinians. So in Afghanistan, I want you to rewind yourself before the fall of Kabul, before the US pulled out. I think there was a survey at the end of 2020, start of 2021. Okay, and what it did, it asked Afghans, what is the price of peace? What do you want? How exhausted are you by the way things are in Afghanistan? And what really stood with me was quite striking, because really what price peace in Afghanistan was quite a lot. You had 57% of Afghans saying the reduction of women's rights in Afghanistan was a price worth paying to stop the fighting, to stop the war, to stop the conflict, with the Taliban. They were willing to go that far. You then had also, I think it's 70% of Afghans said they were content to sort of abandon democracy, abandon the presidential system that they had, and embrace an Islamic emirate, so long as it guaranteed peace, so long as it guaranteed stability at home, so long as you were able to, at least be assured you're not in trouble next week, even though, of course, Taliban rule is quite a troubling thing. That's one thing that stayed with me, because I don't think that really was ever communicated to sort of Western policymakers. They didn't really take that into account. The fact that their country, of which had been supported by Western aid for so long, was just exhausted by them that they were willing to entertain, willing to embrace the Taliban in majority numbers at that point. Another data point that stays with me as well is attitudes among Palestinians, both in Gaza and the West Bank. So for those who, I don't know how many of you are clued up on issues of Palestinian, but recently, or I think it was a year or two ago, the president, who is regarded by Palestinians to be extremely corrupt, decided to cancel the next elections. So in essence, the elections have been postponed indefinitely, and Palestinians, when asked, how do you feel about this, they said, don't really care, to be honest with you. Issues of democracy in places such as conflict zones, in places where, you feel under threat from a day to day, issues of democracy, of, the preservation of human rights, civil liberties, they are almost like trinkets, right? You're willing to expend them. All you want is stability. All you want is safety. Right, and when a poll of Palestinians asked, like, what do you rank as the #1 issue facing you and what the Palestinian Authority should focus on, it wasn't the return of elections, it wasn't the advancement of human rights, it was the gutting of corruption from the political offices and the creation of jobs and the eradication of poverty. Really, that was what mattered most to people. They want stability. And so you can sort of take that, what you just sort of learned in Palestine and Afghanistan there, and take it here to Britain. What have we had over the course of the past year since Partygate? A little bit of political chaos, and in more recent months, economic, personal, financial chaos. When your own government is giving you chaos, you lose complete confidence in it. And in the slides that James showed at the start, the one that I did, which was basically best party on the economy, which party do you trust to manage the books, the Conservatives or Labour? You may have noticed Labour really did surge upwards there. And that was because Conservative competence in the economy had crashed. The Conservative brand, the very thing people vote Conservative for, has disappeared. The very fundamental issue of, managing the books, gone. And that really, really sort of is the reason why Labour's lead is so big right now. Now, before I go on to the UK scene as well, in more detail, I suppose, one of the reasons I got involved in this is actually, or became a little bit more intense in Britain Elects, in getting into the New Statesman, was actually the EU referendum. I don't know how many of you are local to London or whatever, but I come from the north. I come from a little county called Yorkshire, and anyone who's from Yorkshire can't wait to tell you that they are from Yorkshire, as I am. As I am very proud to say, despite the accent. Dad beat it out of me, but we'll ignore that. Okay, so 2016, the UK voted Leave, and I still to this day meet friends who say, I don't know anyone who voted Leave. Okay, and it still stays as a shock in them. And when you live in Yorkshire, or when you sort of, I dare say, study political opinion polling or actually look at attitudes, you're not shocked. That was on its way. We knew it was on its way. All it required was incredibly high turnout amongst what are traditionally low turnout voters. So the same in America as well. Incredibly high turnout from what are traditionally low turnout. For example, in America, you may have noticed the 2020 presidential election. It was quite close, wasn't it? It was closer than we expected. Joe Biden only just got through by narrow margins in Wisconsin, in Michigan, and he lost completely, Biden did, in Florida. Reason being, Trump, particularly in the case of Florida, turned out those low turnout voters, people not reliable, not used to turning out in big margins. So Hispanics, Latinos, those of us who don't normally engage with the political system, Trump spoke to them, got them out, and then look what we have tighter elections. That's what happened in 2016 in the UK. Voters who normally do not give a toss about politics. My parents, basically, they voted Leave. They voted at one stage UKIP because politics was a triviality, a distraction to them, okay? And that really is the reason why I'm interested in this, because there's far too many of us, perhaps even here in the audience, who sort of don't really realise the country we live in. It's a bit more diverse in attitude and reason than we think. A lot of you here are young. Some of you, any of you have grey hair? No, I'm not going to out you. But a lot of young people, we like to assume, vote Labour. We like to go, we're quite left-wing. 66% of us at the last election, those of us aged between 18 to 24, voted for the Labour Party. Okay, and I think it was a good 8 to 10% who voted Green, I think, and a good 10% voted Lib Dem. What's that? That is a stonking majority, at least for some form of progressive politics. But I need to just clarify, that is only of young people who voted, okay? If you need to sort of poll young people who don't vote. And when you do, you actually find out their attitudes are quite different. A perfect example, the case study is, if anyone's watched Clarkson's Farm, I really am going all out here, aren't I? If anyone's watched Clarkson's Farm, Caleb Cooper is the perfect example of the type of young person who doesn't vote. And he like him, they tend to live in outside towns, outside cities. There's about 40% of them, 50% of the young people who don't vote, and they have more slightly right of centre attitudes. So if you, at the moment, 50 to 60% of young people vote, if you turn that up to 100%, it wouldn't be 66% of young people voting Labour. It'll be closer to 50, or maybe a little bit more, because the young people who don't vote aren't like you in the audience, aren't like the reliable voters, okay? And so when we make these assumptions, like we did in the 2020 US presidential election, that all Hispanics, all Latino voters are, Democratic or progressive, well, you're in for the shock of your lives, really. And that's why some people were incredibly shocked when the race was a lot tighter than we expected. Now, let's talk about the UK. So what I spend a lot of my time doing, besides collecting poll data, is actually building these types of trackers. So I build a sort of tracker on Westminster voting intentions. Who would you vote for if an election was held today? Emphasis on today, okay? Because when you have an election campaign, attitudes harden, don't they? Those apathetic people who now say they would never vote, would actually be swayed over the course of the few weeks into voting for someone else. That's why at the moment, we have the Conservatives completely they're not at rock bottom, are they? But they're drifting there, I suppose. This is the worst we've seen the Conservatives poll in, I would say, since Tony Blair's heyday. And this is the best we're seeing for Labour since, I think, 2001, 2002. So really, we are quite in different times. However, for those of you interested in polling or interested in politics more particularly, you may have heard of something called a midterm parliament. We are halfway through a parliament now. We're not having the next election. We probably won't have it in next May, although I'd like it to be. Declaration of interest, I'm standing for election myself to local council, and it would be very helpful if we had a general election then as well. No, the likelihood is the next election will be held in May 2024 or January 2025. So we are in what's called midterm parliament. And historically speaking, in midterm parliaments, you do have this quite a lot. You do have the opposition party zooming ahead and apathy for the government, on the rise, really. And we are seeing that. A good chunk of those that voted for Boris Johnson's Tories at the last election are now saying they will stay at home, okay? And a big share of that, that is the vast majority of where we are right now. But at the same time, around 10 to 15, to sometimes even high as 20% of those that voted Tory at the last election now say they'll vote Labour. That is a big shift. When you are shifting from one party to another, that is serious. But when you are shifting from one party to, I don't care, I'm not voting, that's almost like, okay, you'll probably come back at the next election. Okay, so if any of you pay attention to polls, some of them show this. Some of them show Labour 20, 25 points ahead. One or two of them, by the excellent pollster Opinion Research, show it closer to 15 points ahead. And what they do is they assume all those Tory voters saying, I don't really care. They assume a lot of them will actually come home come the next election. But whatever way you read it, in whichever way you see it, Labour is ahead by quite a substantial margin at the moment. That is sort of the state of the nation, I suppose, as well. And if an election was held today, look at it. 453 MPs for the Labour Party, up 250, quite the recovery, a stark recovery. But again, I must say, This is a mid-term parliament. We are halfway through. Normally governments see things like this. Don't they recover come election time? Well, one argument I kind of want to make to you today, and I would like to just sort of hope that it's going to be convincing really, as that this is not normal. This is not sort of what you normally get during mid-term parliaments. And I would just like to sort of explain why here. So, who do we trust to run the economy? I think I made that point just a few minutes earlier. Who you trust to run the economy is like who you trust to keep the lights on, who you trust to manage the books, the very fundamental issue. There are occasions, like right now, where inflation is a bigger issue to voters than the economy. In 2010 and 2015, immigration dominated as the most important issue facing the nation, with thanks, of course, to the rise of UKIP and then their subsequent crash and burn. But really, it's the economy that matters most. I know you always you hear that overused, tired, exhausting phrase, it's the economy, stupid. I suppose it has to be. Sorry, it is, isn't it, really? What we see when you ask these sort of questions, who do you trust to run the economy? This is a weighted tracker which uses various polling. Going back to the 1990s, we have Gallup, which don't poll in the UK anymore, they do America, and now we have more Ipsos and YouGov and Redfield and Wilson, new kids on the block. But yeah, if you look back, the party that normally is ahead on the economy is the party that wins the election. In 1992, the Conservatives had a lead on the economy. They surprised everyone in winning the election because the voting intentions were so tight. But they had, what was that? That's like a 6, 7, 8-point lead over Labour on the issue of the economy, you know? So really, to some people, to some poll watchers, it shouldn't have been a surprise that the Conservatives came away. And then we come to 1997, where Labour just sort of ran away with it. When was the election? Was it the 1st of July, I think it was? Or 1st of June? Yeah, it's substantial. It's huge. It's quite there. But it should be noted, even before Tony Blair became Labour leader, Labour already had a lead on the issue. So we go through, we go on until 2000 and, what's this one? We go to just 2004. This is the fallout of the Iraq War. You have the Labour base is apathetic. The Labour base is sort of saying, don't trust the Tories, but I'm staying at home. So you'll notice Labour's share on the issue absolutely collapsed. And the Tories only saw a tiny, tiny increase. And, 5 minutes. Oh God, I've got to rush, haven't I? But no, a tiny, tiny increase. That was sort of Labour voters staying at home. They recovered it slightly, but you will remember that 2005 election result, if you do, was lowest share for a party in government. Lowest share for them. They really did quite poorly there. 2007, Labour collapsed and have never really recovered until today, which is, to be honest with you, when you compare it to previous trends, it's quite the astonishing rise. And you'll notice the very, very skinny V there. That's Liz Truss. So that's Liz Truss falling down. So there she is. I actually saw her in Euston today. She was walking. I think she was on a holiday, I suppose. I don't know. It was a very surprise. It was a complete surprise, but there we go. So yeah, Rishi Sunak, sort of janitor in chief, Jeremy Hunt, takes the Tory competence on the economy from rock bottom to very bad anyway. And Labour, to be honest with you, seems to have established themselves. They seem to have filled the void, though to be honest with you, I still have a little bit doubts. Nonetheless, this is significant. This is the first Labour lead on the issue we have seen in 15 years. The closest, the largest margin for quite some time. This is more significant than any mid-term parliament. Okay, when you trust a different party with the books, when you trust a different party with keeping the lights on, that is quite serious. And when it comes to leadership likability, Keir Starmer is a bit of a wet lettuce amongst voters, to tell you the truth, really. Around about 35% have a positive opinion on him, 33% don't, and the rest don't have a clue. So people still have to make up their mind on the Labour leader. And the same can be said for Rishi Sunak, although it's more of the inverse. 31% have a positive opinion on Rishi Sunak, and I think it's like close to 33% have a negative opinion, really. So there is still a lot of uncertainty about the leaders, but on the fundamental issues, my goodness me, we have, I think, made up our mind. And as a consequence, we have this coming up. How would Britain vote if an election was held today? And it's quite the substantial margin. Now, this almost looks ridiculous, because I don't believe it, to be honest with you. If an election campaign was held now, the Tory base would rally, Tory voters would come out again, you know, they would stop saying I'm staying at home, they would come out, and to be honest, the margin would narrow, not significantly, but by enough really to stop Labour from getting over 400 seats, at least. That's what I'm sort of predicting now. But one thing is this, the model we built, the model myself, Michael Goodyear of the Guardian, now of the Guardian, he's defected to the Guardian. Very heartbreaking, isn't it, Nicky? And then Josh Raymond, who was the visual guy, he's absolutely brilliant. He's now working for a big oil company in Norway. Quite the shift for him, I suppose. It's a big move, but he's a great guy. We built all this together, absolutely brilliant. We used something called the strong transition model from electoral calculus. For those who want to really get into the nitty-gritty of it, we used that. But then we also made this assumption that every seat isn't the same, is it? You know, some seats, you may have heard of them in the media, they're called swing seats, aren't they? They're called battleground seats. And what that means is, in those types of seats, there are more swing voters, more types of people who go from Labour to Tory, from Labour to apathy, from Labour to UKIP, so on and so forth, than in other seats. So what we did is we factored for that, and what we created was actually a pretty good model. So what we have here, I hail from the wonderful city of Chester, which I strongly recommend you all visit. We need tourism there. And in it, we had a forecast which had Labour on 62%. And what did we get? 61%. So that's rather good. However, I overstated the Tories by 4 percentage points. We forecast them on 26%. They got 22%. Although that really is down to the Liberal Democrats surprising everybody and doing quite well in the urban Tory middle class inner city wards. They did quite well there, and that was a bit of a surprise to me, what we've living on Chester. Now, I am conscious I only have 1 minute left. I was hoping to ask for questions, and it seems as though I'm going to fail at that. But nonetheless, if we want to talk about data journalism successes, I suppose it actually is predicting how the country would vote. And in this case, in the case of the Chester by-election, we did well. We also did well in another by-election. If anyone really is clued onto politics, there was a by-election in Wakefield in West Yorkshire. We did rather well there. We got the Labour share bang on. We did rather well in Birmingham. If you want to talk about successful data journalism projects, it's predicting how the country votes, how the country feels. And on this, I think, not bad. Not bad, really. So there we are. Thank you for listening.